Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I'm sitting in front of my movie corner. I have a Star Wars t-shirt on because I don't have one that has James Bond. I have my You Only Live Twice movie right next to me, and that means it is time to continue the James Bond retrospective. This is part two, where we are looking at what is colloquially named the Blofeld Trilogy, because it mainly deals with the character of Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Okay, and I mentioned this guy in the first part. We kind of talked about Blofeld being kind of there in the background. We actually see him in From Russia with Love, and we actually see him in Thunderball. But we don't actually see him, we just see a silhouette and we hear a voice. Okay? And it's actually played by the same guy who was Professor Dent in Doctor No. And this trilogy would be the last time that we actually see Blofeld on film in the Eon productions. He would be a brief footnote in one Bond film, which we'll get to, and he wouldn't be seen on screen again until 2015 with Spectre, okay, which we will get to when we get to the Daniel Craig's, okay, in about three or four more videos. So, the Blofeld trilogy, what is it? Well, it is comprised of You Only Live Twice, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Diamonds Are Forever. And basically, it shows Bond's quest to try to take down the head of Spectre, the special executive for counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, and extortion. At first, in You Only Live Twice, Bond doesn't know who he's up against. Okay? He just knows that these capsules in space are disappearing. This is kind of like a Gemini program type thing. Before Apollo. Okay? So the teaser for this film, the pre-credit sequence, opens up on a capsule in space that gets swallowed up by another capsule. Okay? And there's a guy out there, and he gets cut from the oxygen, and he dies. And then you see the United States accusing the Russians. Oh, you just want our space program to fail. And then he's like, and then the British are like, we don't agree. We faint echoes of this craft coming down in the area of Japan. Because in fact, our man is working on it now. And then you see Bond in bed with a woman. Funnily enough, the woman that Bond is in bed with at the opening of this is actually in this film, Casino Royale. Interestingly enough, she was contacted by Michael G. Wilson, who was one of the producers on. Well, he was actually stepson, I think, of Albert R. Broccoli. And he knew the woman from when she worked on You Only Live Twice, and asked her if she wouldn't mind being an extra at the poker table in the Casino Royale. She said yes, and the rest, as they say, is history. So yes, the woman that is in the beginning here, who talks to Sean Connery, and then flips the bed up on him and opens up the door, and the gunmen come running in and they shoot the bed. Okay? And then the two policemen arrive, and then they're like, well, at least it's like, well, at least he died on the job. It's how he would have wanted it to be. And then it goes into the credit sequence. So it actually ends with Bond dying, apparently. Well, you find out Bond doesn't actually die. You find out that they killed him to kind of give him some wiggle room so that he was able to kind of, kind of be able to go on his investigations without too much going on. Without too many guys trying to take him down and stuff. So interestingly enough, the movie takes place almost solely in Japan, which was a new thing for a Bond film, even though it follows the same Bond film tropes. You had the same thing as like Thunderball, where Q comes out and gives Bond some gadgets to work with. There's a gyrocopter in there called Little Nelly, which has a bunch of little gadgets on it that Bond uses. And so there's a whole bunch of different things. And then Bond learns to become Japanese. He learns ninjutsu and some karate and some different things. And they had a whole bunch of different things going on in this film. This, I would say, is probably tied with From Russia with Love for my personal second favorite Sean Connery Bond film. It is really good. And there's a lot of Japanese in it. In fact, Sean Connery learned Japanese for the role so that he could understand some of the ways that the people talked and some of the ways that the people did things, because he didn't want to offend a lot of the Japanese people there. Um, and there he was known as Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Okay, that was kind of his nickname in Japan, was Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Okay, and there was actually a song that was played at a club in Thunderball called Kiss Kiss. That song that is played in the background of that was actually turned into a song by Dionne Warwick called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, based on what they did, which is one of the reasons why the producers went to Japan and went ahead and made this movie work. It was a very, very well done motion picture. I really enjoyed watching them make this film. It was a, watching the film in and of itself is really cool, because they show like the sumo culture. They show a lot of the Japanese culture, the way that people kind of bow to each other in greeting, and the way that they do different things. It was a real glimpse into the world of Japan for a lot of Americans who had never really been there. Okay, so it really kind of gave people this sense of what the Japanese were like to outsiders, and a lot of Japanese moviegoers love this film because it does paint them in a very good light, especially Tiger Tanaka and Kissy Suzuki being the secret intelligence service agents that they are. It shows them in a way that makes them seem heroic to outsiders, and so they really enjoy that part of it. And like I said, it's one of my favorite Bond films of all time, definitely in the top 10. Um, Now we come to what many would probably consider one of the weaker films in the series, but to me it's actually one of the highlights. On Her Majesty's Secret Service. This is George Lazenby, folks. We will kind of get into a little bit of history behind this. At the end of For Your Eyes Only, or I mean, sorry, not For Your Eyes Only, You Only Live Twice, not For Your Eyes Only, we'll get to that when we get to the Roger Moores. But at the end of You Only Live Twice, Sean Connery basically said, I'm done. Okay? Don't want to play the role anymore. I've done it 5 times already. I'm done. And no amount of coaxing by the producers could get Sean Connery to come back. So, similar to what happened around the time of The Living Daylights, which we'll get to when we get to those films, they asked a very popular British actor by the name of Roger Moore, yes, the same one who would go on to play in Live and Let Die, all the way through to A View to a Kill. They asked him if he wouldn't mind coming in and playing James Bond. But at the time, he was locked into a television contract doing a show called The Saint. And if you know your 90s history, okay, you will know that actually, and I don't have the movie here. No, I'm looking for that film right there, because this one's a little bit important. Arg. Oh, come here, you. Okay. So basically, what ended up happening is that he was locked into this the television contract. And he said, sorry guys, I'd love to play the character, but I don't have time. I'm filming these episodes, and it takes up a lot of time. and I can't get any time off to come and be Bond. Okay? And that show was remade, okay, in the 90s with Val Kilmer, may he rest in peace, under the name The Saint, okay? And it was a very popular show in Britain at the time, and I believe it went on another season, and then it was canceled. And by that time, this movie had come out, didn't do as well at the box office as the producers hoped. So they waved a bunch of money under Sean Connery's nose to come back and play Bond one last time. At least they thought it was one last time, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But one last time under the official Eon Productions for Diamonds Are Forever. And then once that was done, basically when it came around to time to do the casting for Bond again, because Sean Connery actually, at the end of Diamonds Are Forever, said, I am done now. You cannot get me to come back for any amount of money, which we'll get to. They went to Roger Moore and they said, would you like to now? And he said, sure, I'll do it. And so then he went on to play James Bond for 7 films, which we will get to in the next video. So now, let's go to who is George Lazenby. Similar to what happened with the casting under Dr. No, okay, when they couldn't get somebody who was known, they decided to go with an unknown. So they went on a worldwide search. And they went to Australia and they found a model, sound familiar, by the name of George Lazenby. Okay? Now, a lot of people consider Sean Connery one of the toughest acts to follow in terms of James Bond, okay? Every Bond has had kind of their own sort of spin on the thing. And the problem is that George Lazenby was following hot on the heels of 5 consecutive Bond films of Sean Connery. Sean Connery had defined the role of James Bond, okay? So it was very difficult for Lazenby to step into that, okay? And I think he actually did a really good job. Now, there's a lot of rumors going around, okay? There's been a lot of rumors over the years that there was some kind of a feud or a beef on set between stars Diana Rigg and George Lazenby. Mostly because some people think that it was Diana Rigg thought that she was going to be working with Sean Connery, and then when it turns out it wasn't, she was kind of mad, and so she was trying to do things to sabotage things on set. That's not what happened at all. In fact, George Lazenby actually said in interviews, has actually said for years in interviews, that he and Diana Rigg actually got along very well on set, and so did him and Telly Savalas. Now, Telly Savalas, for those of you that don't know, there was a show also on British television back in the 60s called The Avengers, not to be confused with Marvel's Avengers, which I have the series right here, folks. This is actually the original Avengers. This is the remake from the 90s. Sound familiar? This is the reason why I was pulling this down, is because this is the Avengers TV show that Diana Rigg and Telly Savalas were a part of. Telly Savalas played Mr. Steed, or John Steed, and Emma Peel was played by Diana Rigg. Okay, and they played it for years. And then in the 90s, they made this nonsensical reboot, which I have no idea why. It's an okay film. It has fairly decent special effects. And Sean Connery's in it. Which you would think would make it amazing. Also, it has Fiona Shaw and Jim Broadbent in it. And for those of you keeping score, you would know... I'm pointing right here. What's that movie series? Harry Potter. Who starred in the Harry Potter series? Fiona Shaw, Jim Broadbent, Ralph Fiennes. All 3 of them were in this film before they were in the Harry Potter franchise. Kind of interesting, actually. Because, and it was funny because I think Uma Thurman was actually approached to play the character of Bellatrix Lestrange. But she turned down the role because she was busy at the time with some other movie projects. And so they turned to Helena Bonham Carter, who I think actually played the role much better. I think she was born to play that role. But Fiona Shaw played Aunt Petunia. Okay, Jim Broadbent, of course, was Professor Slughorn, and we know who Ralph Fiennes was, right? Lord Voldemort. So, interesting little connection there to both the James Bond series and to the Harry Potter series from kind of a circuitous route. So, interestingly enough, that on-set feud never actually happened. And what was the impetus for that? Well, overheard one day on set was, I can't remember, I think it was actually Diana Rigg, made an offhand comment to George Lazenby as they were like going to lunch. Hey, I'm having garlic for lunch today. And so people took that to mean that one or both were eating garlic before they were going out to do their kissing scenes. And actually, it was Diana Rigg was kind of playing around with George Lazenby. This was actually an in-joke that they had both eaten garlic for lunch right before they did a kissing scene. And so when they were kissing each other, they were like, they both smelled of garlic, right? And so it kind of became this in-joke on set of, hey, I'm going to have garlic for lunch, and whether or not they were actually eating garlic for that day was never in dispute because they both realized that, yeah, we probably shouldn't if we're going to be doing these kissing scenes together, but it was an in-joke that was happening with them. So, what do we know about this film? Well, the opening credits starts, or the pre-credit sequence starts with Bond driving along and this woman in a Mercury Cougar drives on. And it's very reminiscent of the scene in Goldfinger where Tilly Soames, or Tilly Masterson, as we learn later, Joe Masterson's sister, is driving behind 007 and then he takes off and then he tries to speed up behind her and then he hears the little beeping and he's like, discipline, 007, discipline. And so we see Bond driving along and then we see this woman pull up around him and he speeds up after her and then he goes, and he drops back, and then he kind of gears back. So it was kind of letting people know that this was supposed to be James Bond, okay? And so he then comes up and he sees this woman kind of walking out into the sea. And when he opens up the glove compartment, we see the AR-7 folding sniper's rifle from Russia with Love, okay? The same one that Bond could fit together and use to shoot the guy in the helicopter, which they used to shoot the guy that came out of the little mouth. You get the idea. And that was to kind of show that this was James Bond, that he had been keeping a lot of his souvenirs. So they were trying to keep it in the actual. They were kind of trying to keep it as grounded as possible in the actual universe so that people understood that this was not a reboot, this was not a reimagining, this was not any kind of a continuation with another actor that wasn't going to acknowledge the events of anything that had happened before. They were trying to say, this is the same character, this is the same James Bond, folks. It's no different, okay? It's Bond. And he saves this girl, and then he ends up fighting with a bunch of guys. She ends up taking her car, driving up to this thing, driving up to her car, and then she gets in and takes off. And then George Lazenby pulls the women's shoes out of the thing, and he looks dead into the camera and he goes, "This never happened to the other fellow." And then he takes off, and then it's like it goes into the actual credit sequence. Okay, kind of a nod to the fact that James Bond was always getting the girl, right? And this time he didn't get the girl, right? It was like, oh my gosh, what happened? Just a little bit of humor to kind of start the thing. The credits sequence, for the first time since From Russia with Love, actually was not sung. Did not have a title song, because how do you make a title song out of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, right? And so that kind of became like in the future, when they couldn't think of something to make a song of, then they would just use a random song. So, for instance, to give you a couple of examples, Octopussy used All Time High by Rita Coolidge, and then Casino Royale used You Know My Name by Chris Cornell. Okay? So, just that's what they did. They thought, well, we can't make a song out of Octopussy, so we're going to make a song. So we're just going to take a song and we're going to put it in the credits, and that way we don't have to just make a instrumental. We want people to have the song, and we want the song to be good, and we want people to sing the song, because that's what Bond is known for. Especially by this point, Bond was starting to become known for his songs, especially Tom Jones's Thunderball, which is one of the best theme songs ever, and like Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger, and of course Matt Monroe's rendition of From Russia with Love, which of course wasn't a title song, but played over the end credits, but was still a very popular song. So Bond was becoming known, and then of course You Only Live Twice by Nancy Sinatra. So you had all of these songs that were hits, okay? Not just in Britain, but they were hits in other places around the world. And so that kind of became this sort of a thing. And so when this came out and it was an instrumental, and then played over that, they were showing scenes from the previous Bond films, basically flashing neon sign in the audience's face, "This is the same Bond!" That was one of the things that I didn't like the first time I watched this film, was that it was almost like the producers were going, "Yo, it's still Bond!" It's like, yes, we get it, okay? We get it, okay! You don't need to keep shoving this in our faces, guys. We get it, it's Bond. Now, this motif would actually come back in the Daniel Craigs, but it was done in such a way that it didn't overstay its welcome, because they didn't have it be in your face. They had it when Sam Smith sings "A Million Shards of Glass," "Faces from My Past," blah blah blah. You see Silva, you see Dominic Green, you see Le Chiffre, you see some of the people, but they're kind of being shown in such a way that it's very subtle. It's not a flashing neon sign. Okay? Plus, it's a continuation with the same actor, not a different actor who was playing in the same continuity, if that makes sense. But fortunately, it would be the last time that they would do that with a title sequence. So basically, Bond has had 2 years to track down Blofeld. Has failed, okay? Blofeld kind of went off grid. Didn't know what happened to him. He's been trying to track down all these leads. So, at first, Bond finds this girl, Tracy. He gets into attack in a hotel room with a guy, and he kind of finds Tracy. He kind of talks with her. That's Diana Rigg's character is Tracy, and there's a tension there that you can feel, and then basically Bond gets pulled to a meeting with this guy named Draco, who is the head of a crime syndicate, sort of like half crime syndicate, half legitimate business, called the Union Corsa. And Bond kind of essentially is, kind of pulled in by this guy. You find out that Tracy is his daughter, okay? And she went out and got married to a guy and then had a divorce and has had some public scandals. And so basically, this guy wants Bond, because he's like, I know what you did for my daughter. I would like you to kind of get to know her and maybe marry her one day. And he kind of tells Bond that he's not going to tell the British Secret Service what's going on. He's going to tell his future son-in-law what he can find about Blofeld. Well, what ends up happening is that Bond then goes and meets, Bond then gets recalled back to London. M sort of dismisses Bond's concerns about Blofeld, throws him out of his office, and Bond kind of tells Moneypenny to take a memo that he wants to resign from Her Majesty's Secret Service. And he says, kindly present it to that monument in there, referring to M, and then walks back to his office. And there he takes a suitcase and throws it open. And then he kind of starts pulling out things, like he pulls out the dive belt from Dr. No that Ursula Andress wore, and he throws it in there. And then he pulls out Red Grant's piano wire garrote, and then throws it in there. And then he pulls out the little rebreather from Thunderball and throws it in there. And there's like little musical cues from each of the films to kind of remind the audience through that musical cue what movie that was from. Okay, so it plays like Underneath the Mango Tree. To the dive belt, it plays From Russia with Love for the little garrote, and then for the rebreather, it plays some notes from Thunderball. So it kind of gets that mindset in your head of, oh, okay, so this is Bond, and this is the first time we actually get to see Bond's real office. Okay, we knew he had one, and if you've read the books, you know that he does have one. But again, this is the first time we actually get to see it. Okay. So, and then he gets called back into M's office. M hands him a sheet, and then he walks back out, and he's like, request granted. And then he's like, request granted without even a thing. And she's like, well, what did you expect, a medal? Why don't you read it? And he goes, 2 weeks leave. And he's like, thank you, Moneypenny. And then he's like, oh, just convalescing. And then he walks off, and then you hear M from inside the office be like, what would I do without you, Moneypenny? Thank you. Kind of, because, like, he's the best agent. And so, M didn't want to lose him, but he just kind of figured that if he, did something that maybe Bond would produce a target. So Bond goes to Draco's birthday party, meets up with Tracy again. Tracy basically blackmails her father into telling Bond about a lawyer in Switzerland who's been communicating with Blofeld, whom they think is Blofeld. And so Bond then, they go through kind of a montage set to the song We Have All the Time in the World by Louis Armstrong. And let me tell you something, that song is amazing because there's this it's a really beautiful song, but there is an undercurrent of sadness to it, and it really doesn't come out until you understand the ending of this film, and why when I did the No Time to Die review, okay, on this channel, why I was like, when that song first came on, I was like, no, you're gutting my heart, dude, what are you doing? Because that song and what it represents to Bond fans is the reason why it will tear your heart out when you hear it in No Time to Die. Because you understand what happened in this film, and when you understand what happens in this film, you know something's going to happen in that film. Okay? I knew it the minute I walked in and I heard that song the first time. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You're playing with my emotions. Who's going to die? But anyway, so Louis Armstrong's We Have All the Time in the World is played over this montage of Bond and Tracy kind of falling in love. Then Bond goes to Switzerland, and he goes up into this lawyer's office, and you kind of find out that Bond and Tracy are kind of getting in this, like, they're kind of falling in love now. And Bond breaks open a safe, copies a bunch of sheets, okay, from this lawyer's, and then goes out, goes back, and goes to M's house, and he's like, I found some information on Blofeld. And he was like, I wasn't aware you had an assignment on this. He's like, I'd assume you'd reassign me, sir, because I was at this lawyer's office, and he pulls out this sheet, and he hands it to M, and he says, it's from a lawyer that's sent, that's been in contact with a man named Blochamp, French form of Blofeld. And the upshot of it is there's this clinic, okay, in Switzerland, in the Alps, that is being run by Blofeld. It's an allergy clinic, okay, and these people go there to get cured. We'll get to that. And so he wants his title recognized. He wants to be called Count Blofeld. And so he wants to know that there's all these things and blah, blah, blah. And so he goes there posing as a member of the College of Arms in London, which talks about heraldry and different things like that. And so Bond uses his own coat of arms as a cover, okay, where he learns about all these different, things in heraldry, like bezels, and which are gold balls, and there's all these different, things. You have animals on them and all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting because we learn of Bond's family motto in this movie. The Latin is Orbitus non sufficient. The world is not enough. Which, if you've never seen this movie and you were watching this movie and you heard when Bond was being interrogated by Elektra and she goes, I could have given you the world. And he goes, the world is not enough. She's like, foolish sentiment. He's like, family motto. He got it from this film, which I thought was a great callback. When I'm sitting in the theater and I heard him say that, I was like, yes! They actually brought it in. Yes, thank you. Because when they called it The World Is Not Enough, I was expecting them to mention that somewhere in there. Okay? So when they did, I was actually surprised. Pleasantly surprised. And so yeah, that was amazing. So then, basically, Bond, of course, finds out that the clinic is populated solely by women. He blows his cover because he's sleeping with every single one of them. He ends up having to escape, which he does with Tracy's help. He asks her to marry him, and then he tries to he tries to get them to go in and blow up, tries to get M to go in and blow up the clinic. M doesn't want to, so he calls, and Tracy gets kidnapped on the escape. And so he basically goes in, calls Draco, says, hey, let's go destroy this clinic. So they have a big battle at the Piz Gloria clinic. Bond goes down and chases Blofeld. The upshot of it is that there's a bobsled chase, and he basically kicks Blofeld up into a tree. And the next time we see Blofeld, he's got a neck brace on. Okay? And then the next scene after that is Bond is at a church getting married to Tracy. Okay? And as a Bond fan, the first time I saw this, because I had seen a few of the Roger Moores at that point, I'd seen a few of the other ones, I'd seen a few of the later ones, like GoldenEye and Living Daylights, License to Kill, and I thought, well, he's not married. So what's this? How can he get married if he's not married? Like, we don't ever see him married. Well, the ending scene explains it. Blofeld does a drive-by. A bullet ricochets in through the windshield and pierces Tracy through the forehead and kills her. It is probably one of the saddest endings to a Bond film ever. Very, very, very wrenching. And then after there's a moment of silence, it starts in with "We have all the time in the world" because that's the last thing Bond says to Tracy is, "It's all right, we have all the time in the world." And that's why when No Time to Die, which is that movie right there, came in the theater and then that started playing in that opening sequence, I was like, how dare you? I know what that song represents. How dare you play with me like that? But we'll get to that movie in a minute. Yeah, it was. Whoo boy, yeah, this movie is really good. I would say that if you're a longtime Bond fan, and you kind of avoid this movie because you think it's kind of weak, I would say give it another watch. And watch it with fresh eyes. Don't watch it directly after you've seen, like, all of the Sean Connerys. Watch it by itself, or, like, watch You Only Live Twice, then watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because it really stands on its own, and it really has an emotional punch. It's a gut punch, man. That is such a gut punch there at the end. Which would have... Now, in the book series, that had lasting repercussions for a long time. Because Kingsley Amis brought it up in Colonel Sun. It was brought up multiple times in the John Gardner novels. Even so far as to, like, when Bond was considering marrying another woman. And this is, I mean, keep in mind, this is like years after the fact. This is like in the 80s. John Gardner was like, this is still something that haunts Bond to this day. Like, it's something that Bond will never forget. Is that he was married and then she was killed the same day. Okay, because that's exactly how the book ends in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It was a... Wow. Yeah, it's a gut punch. Okay, no matter how you strike it. Diamonds Are Forever. So, Sean Connery's back, folks. Yeah, so because On Her Majesty's Secret Service underperformed at the box office, the people said, let's take some of this kind of, put it to the side for now, and we will hire back Sean Connery, okay? Because people weren't sure how to take George Lazenby, so that was his only film, okay? And it's actually one of my personal favorite Bond films. I absolutely adore it. It's a great film. Diamonds Are Forever, however, is not as good as some of the other Sean Connery films. You can tell at this point Sean Connery was just doing it for the paycheck. He really didn't care to be Bond at this point. He had already kind of just said, hey, I've done this character. I don't want to do it again. And they just waved so much money under his nose that he went, okay, fine, I'll come back. So he came back, and they had him be Bond one last time. Okay. Interestingly enough, Charles Gray, who is Blofeld in this film, ended up being, was in You Only Live Twice as a character named Henderson. Very short-lived character. He's only in like one scene. Which was interesting, that they should bring him back and use him as a villain. Similar to what they did with Professor Dent, the character that played Professor Dent. Of course, he came back and played Blofeld, which was another villain, but that was kind of what they did back then. They like to recycle actors a lot. This also features the first American Bond girl, in Jill St. John, as Tiffany Case. And Tiffany being a play on diamonds, because of Tiffany's. and the fact that she kind of carries the diamonds at various points, which is why, I mean, this is one of the things that Ian Fleming did a lot in his Bond series, is the women would always have some kind of connotation to what they were doing. So, for instance, with Honor Blackman's Kitty Galore, right? We talked about that last time. She was a lesbian. Okay. You had Solitaire in Live and Let Die. She was a person who read tarot cards through an actual deck of cards. So she didn't actually use tarot cards. She actually used a 52 card deck. And she would read that 52 card deck, and that's why she was called Solitaire, right? A play on Solitaire, the actual game of Solitaire. And so Tiffany Case, a play on Tiffany's, okay, the very famous jewelers, and Case, like a case of diamonds, like she carried around the diamonds, okay? So that was kind of the reason why they had these kind of names, okay? Now, this wouldn't be the normal naming convention going forward. Kind of after they ran out of book material to use, they kind of started naming them on their own, and so the names actually get a lot more sexual in the vein of Kitty Galore, rather than keeping it in line with what they actually did, if that makes sense. Okay, so that was something that I think a lot of the I think the writers missed that part of it. I think they always just assumed that they had to have some kind of meaning in terms of Bond betting them somehow, which it doesn't. Okay, which is why you got the wacky names that we got in the Austin Powers series, because he was playing off of the wacky names that the writers came up with in the Bond series, okay? That was kind of the whole point. It was a spoof. They were making fun of, they were like, oh, ha, here's, Kitty Galore, here's a lot of vagina, with an F, not a V. And so it was, and that was kind of the whole point, right? Is they were trying to make fun of the names without realizing what the names were symbolizing in the early goings. Okay? Like Honey Rider, she was a girl who was taken advantage of. Okay? And she put a Black Widow under a guy's mosquito net that ended up killing him. Okay? And Bond's like, it wouldn't do to make a habit of it. Tatiana Romanova, she was just a Russian agent, so he just kind of pulled a couple of Russian names out of a hat and then threw them out there, and was, picked a last name that sounded good, picked a first name that sounded good, and threw it out there. Okay. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this in the opening, and I probably did, but I'm going to mention it here again. The name James Bond was because of an ornithologist with the name James Bond. The thing is that when Ian Fleming sat down to write Casino Royale, he wanted a plain Jane name. He didn't want something that was going to be like a lot of people try to ascribe a good name to their spy, right? And he was like, I don't want a flashy name. I want just a plain Jane name. So he was sitting back at his desk, and he was looking up at a bookshelf that was right above his desk. Okay? He had his typewriter sitting there, and he was kind of thinking about it, and he was scanning the book spines, and he saw Birds of the West Indies, which is where he lived, by James Bond. And he went, perfect! James Bond. It's a plain Jane name. And it's very simple. It's very easy to say, James Bond. There you go. That was how Bond got his name, okay? Now, interestingly enough, Bond, the actual James Bond, the man who wrote Birds of the West Indies, got a signed copy of Man with the Golden Gun, which was the last book that Ian Fleming finished before he passed away, that basically had a thing written by Ian Fleming that said, "To the man whose identity I stole, Ian Fleming." And some people were like, "Oh, that's so horrible." Well, I mean, what are you gonna do? Okay, it's a name. Okay, and I don't think many people really knew that until Die Another Day came out. Because in Die Another Day, Bond actually grabs a book from the guy's when he's in Cuba. He picks up a book called Birds of the West Indies by James Bond, and that was an homage to how Ian Fleming came up with the name. There was a lot of homages in this one, considering that it was the 40th anniversary, and when we get to that, we'll talk about a lot of those homages. But getting back to Diamonds Are Forever, so what is Diamonds Are Forever? What is the plot? Well, the plot starts out with the pre-credit sequence being that Bond is going on a revenge mission trying to track down Blofeld and kill him, okay? And he thinks he does, okay? He really does. He thinks he does, okay? Then he comes back and starts to learn about diamond smuggling. You find out that there's these two assassins by the name of Winton Kidd, who actually we are led to believe are homosexuals because they kind of do some different things. We don't actually ever see them kiss. We just see them holding hands and kind of dancing along. Very stereotypical of the portrayal of gay people at the time. I know that there's been a lot of controversy surrounding that portrayal in recent times, not so much back when this movie came out, but more towards the latter 90s and early 2000s, when a lot of the, like, GLAAD and a lot of those kind of places came out and started, like, screaming and decrying Hollywood. They pointed to movies like this to say, well, you guys are portraying us in a negative light. Well, that was Ian Fleming. He did that in the book. Winton Kidd in the book were actually a homosexual couple. And it's the reason why the one guy, I think it's Wint, has the atomizer with sort of a lady's scent to it. Because Bond comments on it when he's in the pipe later on in the film. He says, one of us smells like a tart's handkerchief. And he goes, oh, I'm afraid it's me. Sorry, old boy. He's basically commenting that there's some kind of a smell that he's not used to because the guy's atomizer fell out and then they laid Bond on top of it. And when they pulled him out, they tossed him in the thing. And he goes, and I've smelled that scent before, and both times I smelled a rat. Referring to the fact that he was actually in a tube with a rat when he smelled that scent, and he knows that whoever put him there was wearing that scent, because he kind of smelled it when he walked up to the guy's thing to put the diamonds in a little container, or, in a little spot, and then he pulls out the money, and he looks at the money, and then he throws it in there, and, they tried to kill him. And so both times he smelled this scent, and so he kind of realizes that the guy that's doing it is doing that. And that's kind of how it kind of shakes out. And so the plot is basically that Blofeld is trying to put together a laser, okay, that can blow up things. How to explain this? Excuse me. It can blow up like nuclear weapons, okay? And then basically, like, Blofeld is trying to hold the world ransom with nuclear supremacy going to the highest bidder. Basically, if you give me all your money, I'll blow up everybody else's nukes. You guys get to be the only ones with nukes. And so they're using the diamonds to create the laser, okay? Because they're using the sunlight, because it's a satellite, they're using the sunlight to focus that into a laser beam, okay? which will come back to haunt us. Yeah. Basically, the plot of this, Die Another Day, is basically this plot, if you look at it. It's basically the same plot. Yeah. So, a lot of people don't realize that until you actually watch through the series, and then you're like, wow, Die Another Day is really just Diamonds Are Forever with, like, a couple of added things. It's essentially the same thing. So, yeah, the point being that with a lot of these films, okay, sometimes they would try to recycle plot lines in such a way that it doesn't always come back to haunt them, okay? Like, there are certain ones where they'll have a nuclear ransom story, like, for instance, from World Is Not Enough, but it's different enough from Thunderball that you don't really, like, look at it as being the same thing. Because the villains are after completely different things. In Thunderball, the motivation was money, okay? They were ransoming, the world for like 100 million pounds. In this one, she wants control of the world's oil because she wants all the money, okay, from oil. And so that's kind of a difference between the two, okay? So anyway, Diamonds Are Forever is, in my opinion, is probably one of the weaker entries in the Sean Connery series. I think it's okay. It's kind of a meh Bond film. Okay? I wouldn't put it down on the level of, like, say, an Octopussy or A View to a Kill, which we'll get to in 2 videos. But it's also not the same thing. It's much better than, like, say, Die Another Day or Quantum of Solace. Okay? Which, again, we'll get to. So, I hope you've enjoyed this tour through the Blofeld trilogy, some of the behind the scenes, some of the different casting choices, some of the different things that are going on. I hope this has kind of like reinvigorated you to actually go out and watch these. Oh, and shout out to the moon landing hoaxers, only because they have a scene in here where they have some guys trying to pretend like they're on the moon, and then Bond jumps in like a little moon buggy and then takes it off. They were trying to make fun, they were trying to poke fun at the moon landing hoaxers at the time, because there was actually moon landing hoaxers. So they were trying to poke fun at them in this film by doing that. But no, it's actually, the moon landings did happen. They actually were on the moon, okay? But yeah, it was kind of funny when they did that. So anyway, smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of this James Bond retrospective. Let me know what you'd like to hear me do again. If you'd like me to do some more movies. If you'd like to see me maybe do the same thing with, like, say, the Harry Potter series, or maybe even the Marvel series. Give my thoughts on some of the stuff in the Marvel series. And as we say, we will see you on the next one.